I'm Commodore Anil Jay Singh. I served in the Indian Navy for over 3 decades as a submariner and an anti-submarine warfare specialist, and had the privilege of commanding 4 submarines and a fleet ship. I am presently the Vice President of the Indian Maritime Foundation, which is the country's leading maritime NGO with many areas of activity aimed at spreading maritime awareness in the country. It's a privilege for me to be here on Brains Trust, where many illustrious speakers have preceded me and provided a fascinating insight on a range of subjects with great eloquence and deep knowledge. The maritime domain too has got its fair share of attention, with many former naval stalwarts highlighting the importance of India's glorious maritime heritage, the need to preserve it, and to understand its contemporary significance and relevance as nations will turn increasingly to the sea for their sustenance. India as a maritime nation is heavily dependent on the sea for its security and economic well-being. It has a long coastline of 7,516 kilometers, and its exclusive economic zone extends over an area of 2.37 million square kilometers. Over 95% of its trade by volume and more than 74% by value is seaborne, serviced by 12 major ports and 205 non-major ports. India's energy security is critically dependent on the safe passage of more than 80% of India's crude oil and gas, which is sourced from abroad and travels over the sea. It has 2 strategically located island chains: Andaman and Nicobar Islands on the eastern seaboard, located about 750 miles from the Indian mainland, and the Lakshadweep group of islands, 38 of them, which are located about 200 odd miles from the west coast of India. We have 9 coastal states and 4 coastal union territories. More than 200 million Indians are dependent on the sea for their livelihood. For a country which is so dependent on the sea, the lack of adequate attention to the maritime domain is indeed surprising, to say the very least. This sea blindness is often attributed to India's historic continental bias and post-independence on its preoccupation with its northern and western neighbors constantly sniping at its heels. In a lighter vein, or perhaps really not so, it is also attributed to New Delhi being located more than 900 kilometers from the sea. Unlike events on land, which are visible and impact people in their daily lives and are being beamed 24/7 on our television screens, little is seen and even less is understood about what happens in the maritime domain. Similarly, while armies and air forces operate where people live and are therefore visible manifestations of India's military power, navies operate on the high seas, hundreds and at times thousands of miles away from land, which often leads to questions being asked about what do navies actually do at sea when there is no war. Even lesser known perhaps is what do navies do beneath the surface of the sea. In fact, what lies below the surface of the sea has fascinated mankind since many millennia. The first recorded instance of a man venturing underwater in a vessel was by Aristotle in the time of Alexander the Great, though it is believed that there were instances before that as well. Gaining more knowledge about this domain, which is rich in resources and fragile in its composition, has now become essential for the future sustenance of mankind. It is therefore gaining traction, and nations across the world are investing in developing their underwater maritime domain awareness, or UDA, as it is more commonly known. Admiral Karambir Singh, the Chief of the Naval Staff, who is himself an anti-submarine warfare helicopter pilot, had also alluded to UDA being his highest priority at his annual Navy Day press conference in December last year. In the next half an hour or so, I will provide a brief historical overview of submarining. We'll move on to what submarines are and what they do, and we'll finally focus on the Indian submarine arm and its importance in the dynamically evolving regional maritime security environment. The subsurface dimension forms an integral and important part of every maritime nation's security landscape. The extent of its commitment depends on its threat perception, the geopolitical imperatives which shape the region, and of course, to a very large extent, on its economic and military strength. Undersea warfare is not only about submarines and encompasses many other aspects of warfare. But finally, it is a nation's submarine strength that defines this capability. Countering the submarine threat requires a multi-dimensional approach from the air, the surface of the sea, the underwater space, and now increasingly from space and cyberspace. Technology has also made the surface of the sea increasingly transparent. Extensive surveillance of large swaths of the ocean is now possible from satellites, long and medium-range maritime patrol aircraft, helicopters operating from ships, information sharing mechanisms through military and non-military sources at sea, and unmanned airborne vehicles effectively deployed as force multipliers. This makes it very difficult for large surface forces like aircraft carrier battle groups to operate undetected and therefore inhibits their operational options and their ability to maneuver. Submarines, on the other hand, operate deep below the surface of the sea, which technology has not been able to penetrate to the same extent. They are designed to be extremely stealthy and can remain concealed for long durations, thus greatly enhancing their operational capability. Technology has helped overcome many of the limitations faced by submarines, ensuring that they remain at the cutting edge of the Navy's offensive capability. Before proceeding further, and as a gentle reminder to my naval comrades who sail on sleek, large, powerful surface vessels bristling with weapons and sensors, there are basically only two kinds of ships: submarines and their targets. Having established that, I will now move on to offer a historical perspective of the evolution of the submarine into its present-day avatar. The first offensive action by submarines was recorded on 7 September 1776 during the American War of Independence, when Sergeant Ezra Lee from the Confederate Army, embarked in his one-man submersible, the Turtle, attacked the 64-gun British flagship HMS Eagle in New York Harbor. While the attack was unsuccessful in disabling the ship, it did herald a new chapter in maritime warfare. Many courageous and intrepid inventors and sailors continued to experiment with various designs throughout the 18th and 19th centuries with limited success, and often paying with their lives. And it was only at the end of the 19th century that a submarine resembling a modern-day design was developed by an Irishman named John W. Holland. The Holland boat, as it was called, entered service in the US and the Royal Navies in the early years of the 20th century, and successive versions were successfully operated thereafter. However, not everybody appreciated the advent of the submarine. Here was a platform that crept upon the enemy unseen and delivered its weapon, which went against the very existing concept of naval warfare at the time, when ships faced off against each other with booming guns in classic sea battles. In fact, Rear Admiral Sir Arthur Wilson, a Victoria Cross awardee and the third Sea Lord, described submarine warfare as underhand and damned un-English, and suggested that submarine crews should be treated as pirates and hanged. However, this criticism notwithstanding, there were many who saw the potential of the submarine as a game changer to bring about a revolution in military affairs. The legendary British Admiral Sir Jackie Fisher said in 1904, and I quote, "It is astounding to me, perfectly astounding, how the very best amongst us fail to realize the vast impending revolution in naval warfare and naval strategy that the submarine will accomplish. Never indeed have truer words been spoken." The development of submarines continued apace, and most leading navies of the time acquired and built submarines. They were extensively used in World War I against the enemy's naval forces and to cripple the economy by sinking merchant ships plying their trade in support of the war effort. In the 4 years from 1914 to 1918, German U-boats, which is an abbreviated word for Unterseeboote, alone sank almost 5,000 ships with a gross registered tonnage of nearly 13 million tons, and in the bargain lost 178 boats and about 5,000 men in combat, a heavy price to pay indeed. It was in the Second World War that submarines really came into their own. The legendary exploits of the German U-boats and the Wolfpack tactics almost brought the Allied forces to their knees in the first 3 years of the war, which was finally blunted by Hitler's megalomania, the advent of effective anti-submarine technology, the entry of the US into the war, and finally, the cracking of the famous Enigma code by Alan Turing most recently depicted in the 2014 blockbuster hit, The Imitation Game, with Benedict Cumberbatch in the lead. Submarines from other nations too contributed significantly, and it was the US submarine campaign in the Pacific that virtually decimated the Japanese war effort, destroying over 75% of its merchant fleet and precipitated the end of the war. From an Indian perspective, the stellar role played by submarines and the bravery and courage of the men who manned them, despite large loss of life and large losses of submarines, led Winston Churchill to declare, "Of all branches of men in the forces, there is none which shows greater devotion or faces grimmer perils than the submariner." This sentence has now become a part of submarine folklore. The end of the war saw a shift in the global balance of power with the emergence of the power of the atom. The successful harnessing of nuclear energy soon found its way into military applications and coincided with the beginning of the Cold War. The bipolar world order that emerged was ideologically polarized, with both sides armed with enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world and themselves several times over. Submarines, with their inherent qualities of stealth and surprise, were a natural choice as the most effective platforms to not only deliver the first strike, but what was more important was their ability to deliver a retaliatory strike in response to a first strike. Operating in the depths of the vast oceans and armed with a deadly arsenal of nuclear weapons, they became the most effective means of deterrence to prevent a nuclear Armageddon. In fact, the Royal Navy still refers to these submarines as the deterrent. In 1957, the USS Nautilus became the first nuclear-powered submarine to circumnavigate the world while remaining dived throughout, and introduced a paradigm shift in submarine operations. Nuclear submarine designs and lethality continued to develop, and it was this capability on both sides which ensured that the Cold War, which raged for over 4 decades, remained cold. Colin Powell, former US Secretary of State and a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Committee, encapsulated this in acknowledging the contribution of submariners during the Cold War when he said, and I quote, "No one has done more to prevent conflict. No one has made a greater sacrifice for the cause for peace than you, America's proud missile submarine family. You stand tall among our heroes of the Cold War," unquote. There was a perception, with the threat of a global war receding and the end of the Cold War, the importance of submarines would reduce. But on the contrary, submarine force levels all over the world are now on the rise, and submarines still remain the most effective deterrence platform. Coming to the second part, a little bit about submarines and submarining. Submarines in a nutshell are steel cylinders, and no, one cannot look out of windows and see fishes swimming by, a question that is often asked. There are essentially 4 types of submarines. These include the large ballistic missile-carrying nuclear-powered submarines, which lurk in the depths of the oceans, hundreds of miles away from their base port, either for a first or a retaliatory second strike in an all-out nuclear war. It is said that only cockroaches would survive a nuclear holocaust, but there could also be a few submariners who might survive deep down in the oceans in their submarines. Well, these submarines are called SSBNs for short. The SS stands for submarine, the B for ballistic missile armed, and the N for nuclear propelled. There are only 6 countries which operate SSBNs. These include the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, the United States, Russia, China, France, and the UK. And the 6th is India, which is the latest entrant into this exclusive club. Presently, the US has 14 Ohio-class SSBNs, each of which carries 24 ballistic missiles with 16 warheads each. Russia has a total of 12 SSBNs, including 1 Typhoon class, which displaces 30,000 tons and is the largest submarine in the world. Its latest submarine is the Borai class, which carries 16 ICBMs, each with 6 to 8 warheads, and these missiles have a range in excess of 14,000 kilometers. France and the UK have relatively modest SSBN numbers. Both have a force level of 4 each, which enables them to keep a continuous deterrence at sea. China, which till a few years ago had only one SSBN, a Type 092, has now ramped up its program and has 6 Type 094 SSBNs armed with the JL-2 missiles with a range of about 8,000 miles. Its next class, the Type 096, is already under development. Conservative planning demands a force level of at least 4 SSBNs to maintain a permanent presence of at least one on patrol at all times, because only if there is one submarine always on patrol will the sea-based deterrence be credible. In 2019, the UK celebrated 50 years of continuous at-sea deterrence. I will talk about the Indian capability a bit later. The second type of submarine is the nuclear-powered but conventionally armed submarine, also called an attack submarine, and represented by the moniker SSN, in which SS stands for submarine and N for nuclear propelled. These boats are fairly large, very silent, lethally armed with a combination of torpedoes and land attack cruise missiles with a range in hundreds of kilometers. They are only limited by human endurance and can do high speeds underwater. SSNs offer tremendous offensive capability and can shape the battle space environment to their advantage. The US Navy's SSNs with their Tomahawk missiles were used extensively in Iraq and Libya to destroy critical targets on land from hundreds of miles out at sea. They can operate independently or as part of large carrier battle groups to enhance their effectiveness. SSNs too are the preserve of the 5 UN Security Council members. Brazil is developing its own SSN capability with French assistance, and South Korea is also contemplating going nuclear. India operates one SSN which leases from Russia, which I will discuss a little later. The third type of submarine is the conventionally powered submarine referred to as the SSK and also called diesel electric for short. The SS stands for submarine and the K for killer. These are the bread and butter of a Navy submarine capability and are ideally suited for operations in the littorals, where the depths of water tend to be shallower than in the open sea. These are smaller than the SSNs, are far more stealthy, and can remain concealed closer to the enemy's harbors. They are propelled by electric motors, which draw their power from a bank of batteries, which in turn are charged using diesel generators. Since diesel engines require fresh air for their operation, the submarine has to expose itself above the surface each time the batteries need to be charged. This used to be a serious limitation on the SSKs, which has been now considerably alleviated by the development of a system called Air Independent Propulsion, or AIP, and enables the diesel generators to operate without having to take fresh air from the surface. This was first introduced by Sweden on its submarines in the early 1990s. AIP allows the submarine to remain dight for up to 15 days, whereas earlier the submarine had to expose itself once every 2 to 3 days. Most modern conventional submarines now include an AIP system. India, unfortunately, has yet to install AIP on its submarines. Japan has recently equipped its newest submarine with a new technology using lithium-ion batteries instead of the traditional lead-acid batteries, becoming the first navy in the world to do so. This is the next step beyond AIP, with most global submarine manufacturers in the process of developing lithium-ion battery technology for their own future designs. Modern SSKs are equipped with a mix of torpedoes and missiles. The torpedo remains the primary weapon, and one successful torpedo hit can actually break a ship in half. The SSK is also the perfect platform for sea denial, which means that it is most effective in denying the sea to the enemy. It is therefore the preferred choice of smaller navies to keep a larger threat at bay. In addition to its traditional role of attacking enemy ships and submarines, its ability to operate in shallow waters because of its size and stealth enable it to be deployed on intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance operations, and as a platform for launching and recovering special operations personnel on clandestine missions, and also for neutralizing enemy shipping at the approaches to the enemy's harbors. Some of the leading SSK operating navies in the world, operating more than 10 conventional submarines, are Russia, China, Japan, South Korea, India, and North Korea, which has a bunch of antiquated submarines. The US, French, and the British navies have an all-nuclear submarine arm and do not operate SSKs. In the Indo-Pacific region, which is the region of our interest, Submarines are operated by Australia, Vietnam, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Iran, and South Africa. India recently gave one of its Kilo-class submarines to Myanmar. The fourth type of submarine, which is usually not much spoken about, is a small coastal submarine, often used for special operations or in a very limited underwater operating space, and gives a considerable asymmetric advantage in these waters. Iran has a potent force of such submarines, which it can be expected to deploy against its traditional enemies in the narrow waters of the Straits of Hormuz. Drug cartels in countries like Colombia are now using small, crudely built submarines to transport narcotics in Indian waters, and these are colloquially called narco-subs. Submarines can therefore operate across the entire spectrum of strategic, operational, and tactical scenarios. I will now come to the evolution of the Indian submarine arm, its current trajectory, its future development, and why submarines are important for India. In the very first plan on naval force levels prepared by the Navy within a fortnight of India gaining independence, the requirement of developing a balanced blue water force was highlighted, keeping in mind India's aspiration of becoming the leading power in the Indian Ocean. This plan included a projection for a force of 4 submarines. However, in India's pacifist foreign policy and historical legacy of non-violence and non-aggression, submarines were viewed as offensive platforms. So it took considerable effort to convince our national leadership of their importance as an integral part of a balanced blue water force. In fact, the government kept emphasizing to the Navy that any submarine acquisition would be only for the training of naval personnel in anti-submarine warfare and not for offensive deployments. Thereafter, in the early 1960s, a team of officers and sailors was deputed to HMS Dolphin, the Royal Navy's submarine training establishment, in anticipation of India getting the latest Oberon-class submarines from the UK. However, that did not materialize because the UK did not agree to the Indian request for deferred credit terms of Rs 5 crores for the submarine and its spares. This marked the shift towards the USSR, and the Indian Navy's submarine arm came into being on the 8th of December 1967 with the commissioning of INS Kalvari, a Foxtrot-class submarine at Riga, the capital of Latvia, and at that time a part of the erstwhile USSR. The first batch of 4 submarines arrived between 1967 and 1969 and were literally baptized by fire as they played a significant role in India's decisive victory in the 1971 war with Pakistan, which led to the liberation and creation of Bangladesh. 4 improved Foxtrots arrived thereafter between 1972 and 1974. These 8 boats formed the bedrock of our undersea capability for over 10 years and proved very capable platforms on which the Indian Navy consolidated its skills in all aspects of submarining, both afloat and ashore. A long hiatus then followed, and it was from the mid-1980s that the Indian Navy embarked on a flurry of acquisitions. Between 1986 and 1991, the Indian Navy commissioned 8 Kilo-class submarines called the Sindhu Ghosh class from the erstwhile Soviet Union and 2 HCW-built Type 209 submarines designated the Shishumar class from Germany, which were built bespoke to our requirements. India also commenced the indigenous manufacture of 2 more Type 209 submarines at Mazagon Docks in Mumbai, which were commissioned in 1992 and 1994. Towards the end of the 20th century, the Indian Navy acquired 2 more Kilo-class submarines, one of which, INS Sindhu Shastra, was armed with a missile that could be fired from a torpedo tube, thus adding a new dimension to the IN's undersea warfare capability. By the turn of the century, the IN had a formidable force of 20 submarines, even though the old Foxtrot class were getting long in the teeth and were being decommissioned at regular intervals. India's nuclear program, which had begun in the 1950s, had also envisaged a reactor for submarines. Submarine reactors have to be compact, powerful, and absolutely defect and failure proof because of the environment they are used in. In 1988, the Navy leased a Charlie 1 class SSN from the USSR to gain experience in operating these complex platforms. The submarine was returned on the completion of lease in 1991. A word now on the present and the future of India's submarine arm. India presently has a total of 17 submarines in commission, and another 3 are likely to get commissioned within the next couple of years. These include one ballistic missile nuclear submarine, one nuclear powered attack submarine, and 15 conventional submarines. India's only ballistic missile submarine is the indigenously built INS Arihant, which was commissioned in 2017. She completed her first deterrence patrol in November 2018. This was a significant achievement for two main reasons. Firstly, building an SSBN or a nuclear ballistic missile submarine is a testimony to India's industrial and technological prowess. SSBNs are supposed to be more complex than spaceships. The second significance of this patrol was the validation of a complex ecosystem which includes a robust command and control architecture that should be able to order a submarine deployed thousands of miles away and hundreds of meters below the surface of the sea to launch a nuclear missile at a specific time on a specific target, also located thousands of miles away, at a time when the country and the National Command Authority itself could be under attack from a nuclear first strike. However, while establishing the efficacy of the nuclear triad with the validity of the sea-based deterrent, which was a result of this successful patrol, it does not yet make the nuclear triad complete in all respects. That will only happen when the country can carry out continuous deterrence at sea, which will require a minimum of 3, if not 4 such submarines. The nuclear ballistic missile submarine program in India is well underway. It is understood that the second SSBN Arihant is at an advanced stage of her trials and should enter service soon. 2 more larger SSBNs are also under construction. Hopefully, India will be able to achieve this before the end of this decade. The Arihant is presently armed with a missile which has a range of about 750 kilometers, but a larger missile, the K4, with a range of 3,500 kilometers, is also undergoing trials. This will act as a suitable deterrent to any mischief being planned in our neighborhood. In 2012, India leased a nuclear-powered attack submarine, an SSN, from Russia for 10 years. Also called the INS Chakra, this is an advanced Akula-class submarine and one of the most successful Russian SSN designs. The lease for this expires in 2022, and plans are already afoot to replace this submarine with another Akula-2 submarine from 2025 onwards. The experience with these 2 Akula-class submarines will provide a rich experience of operating and maintaining these platforms and prepare the Navy for the future induction of 6 indigenously built attack submarines which have been approved by the Cabinet Committee on Security. These 6 SSBNs are on the drawing board at present. Building these will be challenging and will require firm commitment and support from the establishment. If all goes well, the first indigenous SSN could be in service by the first half of the next decade. It is, however, the conventional submarine force, presently comprising 15 submarines, which will continue to remain the core of our undersea capability. Most of these submarines, except for the 3 Project 75 submarines called the Kalvari class, are more than 2 decades old, but modernization has kept them in fine operational fettle. The fact, however, remains that they are aging, and the delay in finalizing the replacements is an area of concern. 3 more Kalvari class submarines are at an advanced stage of trials and construction and should join the fleet in the next couple of years. The delay in delivering these submarines has led to a state where our latest boats do not have contemporary technology like air-independent propulsion, which may now be fitted on them at a later date. In the contemporary maritime security scenario, the lack of an AIP system seriously limits their deployability. The next program on the anvil is the Project 75I, which is being progressed under the Defence Ministry's strategic partnership model, which is meant to encourage a higher level of indigenization and self-reliance, or Atmanirbharta, which is the new buzzword in the government. 6 submarines are to be constructed under this program, which should include the latest technologies like lithium-ion batteries and a potent torpedo and missile capability. However, at the present pace of progress of this program, these submarines are also not likely to enter service till the early 2030s. Credible naval force development is a long lead time activity. Naval acquisitions are capital intensive, they take time to build, and thereafter to integrate fully with the existing platforms in a fully worked up combat environment. It is therefore important that a holistic view is taken of submarine force development and capability to ensure that we always have a credible number of modern, well-armed, state-of-the-art submarines at all times. This requires an institutionalized follow-on plan to avoid obsolescence and depletion in force levels, which then leads to acquisitions taking place in fits and starts with consequential disadvantages. Finally, a few words on why India needs submarines. The shift in the global geopolitical center of gravity to the Indo-Pacific has been driven primarily by the rise of China and its relentless pursuit of its ambition to become the global numero uno by 2049, which also happens to be the centenary year of the Cultural Revolution. It has already established its domination in the waters east of the Malacca Straits with its 9-dash line and belligerent actions against its maritime neighbors, and is now focusing its attention towards the Indian Ocean. It is growing its naval footprint and developing a network of ports and other infrastructure in the strategically located coastal countries and island states through its ambitious Belt and Road Initiative. While the Chinese Navy's ability to operate in the Indian Ocean may be limited at present, it is expanding at an astonishing pace, and in the next 5 to 10 years could well begin to challenge India's primacy. It already has the largest navy in the world by numbers, though second to the US in capability. India is the largest maritime and naval power in the Indian Ocean. It has a pivotal position in the center, with its peninsular mass jutting almost 1,000 miles into the sea, and it straddles some of the most critical sea lanes in the world, over which the bulk of global trade and energy travels. India must leverage this advantage that geography has bestowed on it to prevent the Chinese dragon from breathing fire. The Indian Ocean is also unique in that it is bordered by choke points, thus narrowing the route for the entry and exit of seaborne military and commercial traffic. China is acutely aware of its vulnerability, as the bulk of its trade and most of its oil and gas passes through the Malacca Straits, and some through the Lombok and Sunda Straits, which are all located in the southeast proximity of India and can be effectively monitored. China refers to this as its Malacca dilemma, and India must on no account allow the strategic advantage to be compromised. The other major disadvantage for China is the shallow depth of these straits, which preclude their submarines from transiting through these in a dive state. Hence, any Chinese submarines transiting through these waters will need to do so on surface, thus compromising their position, and also will therefore allow their movements to be monitored. As an emerging maritime power with an aircraft carrier-centric blue water navy, India must develop adequate power projection capability to protect its strategic maritime neighborhood and its maritime interests anytime and anywhere in the world. One is reminded of Pandit Nehru's words when he visited the cruiser INS Mysore in 1958. He said, and I quote, "We cannot afford to be weak at sea. History has shown that whoever controls the Indian Ocean has, in the first instance, India's seaborne trade at her mercy, and in the second, India's very independence itself." 63 years later, the Indian Foreign Secretary reiterated these very words and added, "We forget this lesson of history at our own risk." To ensure that this lesson is not forgotten, India must build adequate multi-dimensional naval capability on the surface, in the air, and below the surface of the sea. The cornerstone of the Indian nuclear doctrine, which was promulgated in 2003, is no first use. This means that India must have the retaliatory capacity to either deter an adversary from making the first move and the ability to deliver a suitable response of a larger magnitude, should anyone decide to undertake this misadventure. The most credible second strike platform is the SSBN, or the Nuclear Ballistic Missile Powered Submarine, since both land and airborne platforms can be neutralized. The Indian Ocean region is critical to India's security interests, and any extra-regional or regional turbulence will have an impact on its own security. Although India's area of primary interest is limited to the Indian Ocean region, the waters to the east and west of the Indian Ocean cannot be ignored and remain areas of secondary interest. The underwater dimension will always be a vital component in India's maritime security matrix. Recent operations across the world have distinctly highlighted the contribution of underwater capability towards achieving joint effect including delivering kinetic effect on land. While the Nuclear Ballistic Missile Submarine, or the SSBN, is primarily a strategic platform and is unlikely to ever be deployed in active operations, the SSN and the SSK fleets will be integral to an optimum force mix capable of delivering maximum effect across the entire spectrum of conflict. The Indian Navy is poised on the cusp of redefining its undersea warfare capability in consonance with its security imperatives. Ideally, the Indian Navy should be looking at a force level of at least 5 SSBNs, 6 SSNs, and about 18 to 20 modern SSKs. Well, thank you for this wonderful opportunity, and I now leave you with a few images of what the interiors of a submarine are like. Thank you.